with a foot in the door, so to speak, I could leverage that into a job, and that's how it turned out.
You struggle with this concept of what sets me apart, because the traditional pathway just isn't there anymore.
I'm actually more bullish about it now than I have been in a long time.
Hello and welcome to this Melbourne Press Club podcast. My name is Ed Bourke and I'm an intern at the MPC. We're approaching a critical stage of the academic year where Year 12s and uni students have big decisions to make about their futures. During this pandemic, the journalism industry has faced a lot of uncertainty, but the media is crucial to our society and more jobs will evolve than completely disappear. Today I'm very fortunate to be joined by two excellent journalists from different generations who will compare their pathways into their current jobs and share their perspectives on the state of the media industry. We will hear from The Age football and athletics writer Michael Gleeson, who spent many years as a crime reporter at the Sunday Herald and then Herald Sun, and has also written 7 books over his career. And offering a different look at the industry will be more recently established journo Sophie Welsh from the Herald Sun. Sophie also works as a digital producer and began at the Herald Sun as an editorial assistant in 2018. I hope this can offer some valuable insight for those interested in a career in journalism and maybe even provide some reassurance that there are still many ways into the industry. We'll skip through the obligatory awkward video call introductions and we'll jump straight into the interview with Mick and Sophie. Mick, can you describe your pathway into journalism, how you went through university and then different jobs you had before you came to The Age?
My pathway was significantly different to what it is. The experiences are now, given that when I arrived in journalism, it was at a period where they were opening papers, not closing them. I was doing an arts degree at Melbourne Uni and working in a pub, the Fenwick Inn, and didn't really know what I was going to do next. And I was serving a guy, Steve Marsland, who was the chief sports editor of the yet-to-be-launched Sunday Herald. And we got talking, and anyway, one thing led to another. I got a job as a copy kid, and that then sort of encouraged me into the idea that with a foot in the door, so to speak, I could leverage that into a job, and that's how it turned out. I think I finished my last uni exam on the Thursday and started at the Sunday Herald on the Tuesday. It was quite funny. I remember working as a copy kid and asked, and I was going through the process at the Herald at the time about getting a cadetship, and went to Alan Farrelly, who was the editor then, and said, this is where I'm up to. They're making a decision in the next couple of days between, a couple of people. He goes, cadet. Yeah, I suppose we should have one of them. Do you want to start Tuesday? Right. Yeah. Okay, Alan, that'll be good. So that was it. And then, I was at the Herald Sun. The Sunday Herald for a bit, and then they merged, and I was at the Herald Sun for about a year, and then went overseas for 3 years backpacking, and worked in the UK in London at a news agency there. So I was there for a few years and came back, worked briefly at AAP and the Sunday Age, and then worked at the Herald Sun for 10 years, and then came across to The Age 15 years ago. I was just a kid from the suburbs, and no one, my brother and I were the first people in our family to go to university. And so the idea of getting a job such as that, knowing how competitive it is, I just thought, that's beyond, as if they're going to choose me. So until I got that little step, that little opening, I really didn't entertain the prospect that I would be sufficiently different to anyone else to be able to convince them that I was the one that they should go for. And so it was that sort of moment was the critical thing. So working in a pub actually got me my job in journalism, and actually working in a pub probably helps you with your job in journalism.
Sophie, which pub did you work in to get your start in journalism? So how does that experience compare with what you did to break into the industry?
Well, it's quite interesting that Mick spoke about how working in a pub kind of gave him his start, because it was almost a sort of a similar thing to me, except instead of a pub, it was I was a receptionist for a doctor for a few years. So while I was at uni doing my journalism degree, and it's this kind of dropping in the middle of my story and my path to ending up in a newsroom, but it was actually the skills I'd picked up answering the phones and dealing face to face with patients that gave me the skills that eventually got me into a newsroom, if that makes sense. I interned. I did a lot of internships while I was at uni, and a lot of them ended up with me, it was very difficult climate, difficult to get into a newsroom, let alone to, you know, turn an internship into a job. And they were kept handing in my resume and being told no. So I was at the Herald Sun, interning in the digital team. And as I did normally, I, you know, handed in my resume at the end of my few weeks there, and nothing really came of it in terms of like a job in the digital team. But I had heard that the editorial assistants, so the people, we answered the phone, sat on the desk, dealt with news tips and dealt with angry phone calls from punters and our readers, that was a different way to start, a good way to, more of an entry-level position, rather than, you know, done my internship, now give me a job as a reporter or a cadetship. So it was kind of like a step back from what I thought was the traditional pathway. So I inquired about maybe a job there, and it was actually the skills that I picked up in answering the phones and dealing with patients at my reception gig that got me the job, rather than actually my writing ability or my experience in journalism, if that makes sense. I started my degree in quite a rapidly contracting landscape. So I had to kind of look at different avenues and reassess what I thought was the traditional pathway, because the traditional pathway, just in my view and experience, it isn't there anymore. So I had to be a little bit creative and look at other options. And then, it was actually my my experience in a reception gig that I guess got me actually through the door and got me my first real gig in journalism.
So were those the key skills, Sophie, that you think helped you get that job at the Herald Sun, that kind of day-to-day communicating, rather than anything that you picked up in your master's in journalism?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to say my degree was useless or anything, but I think, as Mick said, like, you struggle with this concept of what sets me apart, how am I significantly different to other people vying for the same gig. And I think, for better or for worse, it was my ability to, I guess, talk nonstop to people, and my ability to kind of diffuse situations that may have been a little bit dicey or a bit emotionally charged, that did get me a job and set me apart from everyone else who had a degree and who'd interned.
So, Mick, what do you think were the key things you learnt on the job as a reporter?
Initially, it was try to think laterally. I found it particularly difficult starting at a Sunday paper, where there isn't that go out each day, be sent to a court, be sent to a police, issue. It was, okay, what can we do? Where can we look behind the scene? And that, I found that, as someone that's coming into the job for the first time, that was really difficult as a junior. And then I think you find that easier the longer you're in it, I think. But those first things, police rounds and courts are the two absolute bread and butter and best things that you can do as a junior reporter. I remember before I was on the Herald Sun, I was working on a Christmas Eve, and it was 1991. There was no paper on Christmas Day, and I was on the police rounds, just sort of watching brief. There was a big fire at Athol Lodge, and over a dozen people died. It was a men's boarding house. It was in St Kilda. I remember going down there, and it was honestly like nothing that you'd ever seen before. It's certainly nothing I'd ever seen before. The fire trucks couldn't get into fire because of the ambulances getting in to try and treat the people, and vice versa. So they neither could get in. It was a sort of a small cul-de-sac, and the neighbours were all out, and people were on the street being treated by their neighbours, these men being dragged out. And it was just extraordinary, and it was really disturbing. And I remember after that, and some of the better advice I ever got with how to deal with something like that was, okay, don't be overwhelmed by it. Pretend you've just walked into the pub and you with your mates, tell them what happened. And that was the simplest and best advice I reckon I ever got with covering an issue, which was just write it like you're telling your mate what just happened, because the first thing you'll do is tell them the most interesting thing to you. And rather than try and wrap everything up in one, long first paragraph, you're going to hit to the nub of the point straight away. And those sorts of things, as a reporter, were really critical. And then, doing courts, honing your shorthand. We were doing the shorthand, doing the 120 words a minute with, Loretta. And it was just, it was the skill that you needed to have. You still get caught out all the time, unable to record stuff. So you learnt those basic skills. Courts just give you, they're like, movie reviews. You sit there and it's just presented to you, and you've got to then work out, okay, there's all the information, but let me find the best line in it. So those were really important things. And then the other really significant thing for me was working in the UK, working in London. Went over there just back then and then got a job at National News Agency, and it was a fantastic place to work because your stuff was syndicated to all of the nationals, and so you'd write a story, and the same piece would be run in the Times as run in the Daily Star, but you were sent to so many crazy things, and that was a time of Princess Di being around, and you were sent to doorstops and you were sent to courts, and it was fantastic. Your skills, you came back infinitely better journalist after that experience than I was certainly when I left.
And Sophie, have you been thrown around into a lot of different sort of beats and roles in the newsroom, or have you found that it's more sort of set in what you do in day to day at the moment?
Being thrown around is a really good way of putting it. It's for I think maybe nearly a year, it was just you rock up to work and you have no idea what's going to happen. I was as a byproduct of the rapidly contracting landscape is us EAs after I'd only been there I think 2 or 3 months, we started picking up casual reporter shifts because we didn't have enough actual reporters, so we were really genuinely thrown in the deep end. And much like Mick's experience over in the UK, it was just this unbelievable, intense on-the-job training, and nothing compared to it. Like I've been to court, I've driven 3.5 hours out to a country town to chase something. I've loitered in the depths of the MCG car park trying to get a comment from a footy player. I've been to crime scenes. I've spent a full 3-day weekend camped out at Fawkner Park after a murder in the park. Just, it's incredible. And while some of the stuff I learned at uni was really helpful, like the inverted pyramid and I guess media law and that sort of thing, nothing compares to being out on the job and putting in those hard yards and learning how to speak to people to get your story. And yeah, it's that same as Mick said, like how that whole thing of write your story, how you explain your day to your mates or to someone around you. That's something I learned on the job as well. Just from literally coming home and telling my friends, you'll never guess what I did today. And I'd give them the spiel, and that ended up being my lead because it was all distilled into that one phrase. Casual reporting was a wild, wild ride. Today, like I'm now in the digital team, more of a desk jockey. It's very different, a fair bit more routine, but it's the same basic thing applies for me. Like you never know what your day is going to do, what gaps are going to need to be filled. You may have a big, a story that you need to work on, but then something big happens and you've got to drop everything and throw all your time and attention into that. It's exhausting, but it keeps you, I guess, interested and engaged because no day is the same.
So what advice would you have, Sophie, for current Year 12s thinking about journalism and journalism students with how they should try and prepare to meet the demands of that sort of casual reporting that you had to do early on at the Herald Sun?
I think the main thing would be if you're not sure, ask someone. The first day I ever got sent out to a scene, I just followed the TV news reporters around all day, just learning how they did things, and that just shadowing them, I guess, was a really good way to learn how to do the job. So I guess don't be afraid to ask and for help, and don't assume you know everything, and be really receptive to, I guess, to advice and communicating with other people in a similar position. More broadly, I think don't be afraid to pursue journalism, even though it seems a bit tough and a bit different to how it may have been previously. It does look really different now, but I think there's still a lot of opportunities. They just may not look the same as they did 5, 10, 20 years ago.
And talking about the current journalism landscape, a lot of the external discourse around journalism for at least a decade and probably further back, Mick, is how it's dying, which I think just reflects how constant and dramatic a lot of the change has been. Mick, what attributes do you think have helped you deal with that change and the demands of your job changing over the last few years?
Oh, probably fear of doing anything else. No, I think there's also, quite seriously, I think there's an element of identity. You identify, this is what I am, this is what I do, and so I've always believed that I'll stick with it, and that's what I love. And there's always been pessimism about the future of journalism since the day other than 12 months after the first newspapers, those papers launched. But since then, it's been, papers closing, and there's therefore been pessimism and cynicism about the future of it. But I actually more bullish about it now than I have been in, a long time, because you see that the numbers for news outlets, particularly from the bushfires through the pandemic, people are actually craving news. People are wanting to know. Now, the question is more one for accountants. How do they turn that into profits and altering the bottom line on things, and how do they turn it into advertise? But the reality is people come to the sources that they trust increasingly because they're seeing the alternatives. There was no internet when I first started, so that's been the most fundamental change. There was no mobile phones. So, you had to get people on their phone at home beforehand, or you wouldn't get them. Or after work, you had to get them on their mobile phone, on their landline. People don't even have, I don't even have a landline now. So all of that changes, but it's, John Sylvester said in Gravity, he said, the good old days weren't that good. The journalists that are coming in now are better than a lot of the people that came before. Look at the work that some of the young journalists are doing coming into the age now, Poops Carl and Samaya, and it's phenomenal. They're stars, and they're better equipped to do the job than we were. And they're doing it better than we were at that age.
So for current students and students who are interested in heading into, what do you think they need to prepare?
The first job is in some ways the easiest one to get at the moment. Because there are internships and there are people offering, that sort of foot in the door. So just seize any of those opportunities and seize them wherever you can. At this stage, there is no bad experience because it will help you. And regional, wherever it is, it will help you. I think that also the big thing is to embrace the technology. Sophie's working on the digital team. That's fantastic. That sort of stuff, and trying to work out ways to reshape journalism from what it was. And I think that was the big difference for people my age and older, was the idea of the internet. And it was there were the two products. There's the online product, and then there's the print product, and there's still a residual view of the story running for print, but what about online? And that they were competing forces. We've worked out a lot better now how to actually present a story more impressively than we ever could in print by utilising the tools that are available to us online. How to use video and these graphics that are just phenomenal. And I think that's reinvigorated a lot of people, a lot of journalists, to understand that they can make their story better. What that means for young journalists is, utilise the fact that you're probably more technologically savvy than any of us are. Utilise the social media, utilise these other tools at your disposal. The other big thing I always found was when you're a young journalist, the first thing, as Sophie said, you follow the older journalists around. That's great. But the other thing to remember is don't be intimidated. And don't be intimidated by the press conference. Don't be intimidated by asking the question. If you think that's a question you want to know, sure enough, someone else is going to want to know it too. But you can sit there thinking, going over in your head, am I going to sound dumb? Am I going to sound dumb if I say this? Are they going to turn on me and make me look like an idiot? Then you realise, no, actually, there's other people sitting there thinking the same thing, wondering the same thing. If you've got the question in your head, someone else has got it in their head and they want it answered too. So don't be afraid of the dumb question. Often it'll provoke the response that you want that gets you the story.
So you're looking forward to how the landscape in journalism is going to continue changing. Are you happy with the decision you've made to continue to pursue this career?
Yeah, I think so. It's definitely different now, even to when I started 2 or 3 years ago. It was different then as it is now still. I'm pretty happy with my decision to move into the digital side of things, because I do think that digital training, and it's the future of journalism. It's something that I think more and more journalists will be trained up in. I mean, I don't think I'll be doing this same job for forever, but I do think it's the way things are moving. And I think, I'm pretty happy to be where I am now. As Mick said, there's nothing like it. There is nothing like the thrill of a good story. There is nothing like being able to write the first draft of history. It's such a wild ride and it's so much fun. But yeah, it is absolutely a lifestyle. Especially now being in online, you don't really switch off from it. I'm very happy with where I am, and I definitely think there is a bright future, I think, in journalism, even though it may not look the way people thought it would.
Well, Sophie and Mick, thanks very much for joining me today. It's been really interesting to hear about your different experiences in journalism, and I think it's been a really helpful conversation for students and maybe current journos as well. Thanks so much for coming on.
Pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Always a good thing, Ed.